All right, welcome Buddy Book Club. I'm Dylan, here with my guardian, Keith. Keith, there was a bottle of whiskey that I cooked up especially for you. Have you had a chance to try it?
No, I mean, after this book, I don't think I'm going to be drinking any moonshine or anything from people like you. You know, the cow wrestlers, rum runners, horse thieves, scallywags, pimps, stagecoach robbers, desperados, and other human transgressors. Yeah, that's what you are, kid.
I like it. Is a transgressor and a traingresser? Is that a little bit different?
I don't know.
Whoever smashed our boy's head and then tossed him off the train, that is a traingresser.
I've never heard scallywags before. I was like, wait, what? That's a real thing?
Oh, yeah, it's like in the Chappelle Show, the Haters Ball episode. When he's skip, scap, scallywags. Yeah. Here at the Buddy Book Club, we're breaking down some bestsellers, and this week we're going to be discussing Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann. If you'd like to recommend a book for us to read or reach out to us about past episodes, you can visit our website, buddybookclub.com, or slide into our DMs on Twitter or Instagram, Buddy Book Club Podcast. Download and subscribe. We'd appreciate it. Let's get into this because this got on my radar from you and Marty Scorsese, who is now turning this into a feature film. And I like this because I personally like to read a book before I see the film. This one's a little different. Usually they're fiction stories that we then go and see in the theater, and then we're like, the book was better. Oh my God, you guys didn't read the book. So this time we get to do it with a nonfiction story. And I do like, in general, knowing the background of nonfiction stories, because you know that the movie is going to be sensationalized, which this story itself is sensationalized in real life, but it's going to be more of a focus on some characters and not necessarily the bigger scope that we get from the nonfiction stuff. So that's why I like these in general. For those that haven't read the book, it's pretty much the government pushes the Osage people, which is an American Indian tribe, to a reservation in Oklahoma, and unbeknownst to the federal government, the land was chock full of oil, which is good because if they had known, they definitely wouldn't have given it to them, those rascal government agents. And I mean, we're talking a good amount of oil. Like in 1923 alone, the tribe took in $30 million from the oil fields, which is equivalent to about $400 million today. So lots of cash going on in Pawhuska, Oklahoma. Yeah, so pretty crazy story. We'll get into it with some stock up, stock down. Keith, what do you got for stock up?
Yeah, we're keeping it light here, by the way. I know this is a pretty sad story. Pretty
terrible.
Depressing. So just a heads up for those that aren't aware. But anyways.
If there's any members of the Osage tribe listening, I apologize up front. I'm sorry. We are not going to be taking this as seriously. We do understand that lots of people were murdered, and I apologize. That is terrible. Screw the government.
Yeah, the problem is we read all fiction, so that's the scope that we're taking from this. So anyways, stock up town names. So in New England, we have all these British town names. It's just unoriginal. There's really just
New Bedford.
New England, it's called too.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
like it's just zero originality. And did you know, I just learned recently too, even on the West Coast, you look at a city like Portland, that's named after Portland, Maine. And do you know how they chose that? They flipped a coin between Portland, Maine, and Boston, Massachusetts. So those are the two names. It's going to be Boston or Portland. So they could have been Boston.
I didn't know that. I like that.
They flipped a coin to decide that. So just no originality. Here in Oklahoma, know what we name towns? Whizzbang.
Yeah.
You know why we named it that? Because all people do is whiz during the day and bang during the night. I mean, this is what we need. This is a great town name. I mean, I looked up the Wikipedia too because I was like, is that real? It's a real town, or was it a real town, or maybe that was like the nickname for it, but it's Wizzbang, Oklahoma, and Wikipedia. But the town itself is insane. Like the stories they have, you know, like they have all those like Midwest shows right now. They're big. 1889 and
Yellowstone.
They just have a Wizzbang. Make that a show, and I'm all in because it sounded awesome.
It's an interesting part of history because the frontier, wild, wild west is in the past. You know, that was kind of the 1800s and whatnot. Now we're into the 1920s. The general idea at the time is that people felt like they were moving on. This is more modern and civilized West. When they were talking a little bit in the backstory of, you know, what's going on in the area and whatnot, just talking about local lawmen and how oftentimes, one, they were working alone on these giant swaths of land trying to bring justice to these places. But a lot of them were just like ex-cons who were taken on like, oh, okay, like now I'll be a lawman. And because they were, you know, familiar with the territory, familiar with weaponry and just like, that's fine. It was wild to me.
The only people they could trust to are like people that are in jail or con men or like, it's like, what? These are the only people? Like, yeah, no one else will talk to us, so we have to go to the criminals.
Yeah,
like,
all the people they use are criminals. Yeah. My first stock up is The White Man.
Jesus Christ. Okay.
And no, I'm not talking about The White Man as a group, because as a whole, they were unsurprisingly terrible to the Osage people, as well as 99.9% of the rest of the American Indians. So no, I am not talking about The White Man as a whole. I'm talking about Thomas Bruce White Sr., the Bureau of Investigations officer in charge of the Osage Murders
there you
case.
go.
Yeah.
Nice. Good turnaround there. You had me in the first half. Not going to lie.
Yeah. And you're like, oh no, we're canceled. But he's exactly what you want from a lawman. And Tom White doesn't come into the story really until part 2. The book's kind of broken up. Like part 1 is more of a history of what's going on. Part 2 is more of the investigation into the murders. Whereas then part 3 is like fast forward the journalist looking into other murders, which is interesting too in the audio version, how they do 3 different narrators for each section.
I also thought the last narrator was the author because he was not very good.
I thought it was too. Was it?
No, it was some other guy.
Oh, he was terrible. If he was there to read me a bedtime story, I'd be all in because he would put me right to sleep. But outside of that, I was like, what is going on here? But either way, let me get back to The White Man. Tom White, he's exactly what you want out of a lawman. He's incorruptible. He's fastidious. He's fair. I mean, the fact that later in life, after he gets basically held hostage and attempted murder upon himself and shot in his arm's useless. He's given himself a stranger left and right after that. And he turns around. Once he recaptures these guys, he's like, hey, don't hurt them in jail. Don't worry about it. I'm over it. Who would do that? But there's so much corruption and terribleness going on in the Osage County or whatever, with all of these murders and all the lawmen being in on it, the lawyers being in on it, the wealthy businessmen being in on it. And he's able to go in there and solve the case. It's pretty insane they were actually even able to solve the case. People are lying to you left and right. I mean, there's evidence tampering. You got crooked cops and crooked private investigators. He's coming in months or sometimes years after these events took place and trying to solve these cold cases pretty much. Mm. It's wild considering that they have a show on TV that's called Cold Cases, and it's people with like current forensic evidence trying to solve cold cases and they can't do it. And this guy doesn't have any of that at his disposal and yet is still able to go in there by basically saying, okay, there's so much corruption in here. I'm going to be the face of the investigation. All my other agents are going to be working undercover and like trying to get different stool pigeons to give us information, and then we're going to work the case all over again, starting from stage 1.
I also like how the issue wasn't, there's so many people here and we have to sift through people and find who the bad guy is. The issue is that there's so many bad people, they have to figure out which bad person is the actual person that's killing people. Because they're like, this person was cheating on this person and like committed bank fraud and robbed a couple banks, but I don't think he was there to kill the person. It's like, wait, what? Like, that's just his backstory? It's like, yeah. And this other person, he divorced his wife. He beat her multiple times senseless, but I don't think he was actually going to kill this person because he wasn't there. It's like every person's just a shithead. And you're just deciding between which shitheads are the worst of them? Yeah,
it's like a guess who, and you're trying to solve a crime, but all the faces on the board are either like murderers, bank robbers, safe crackers, train thieves,
scallywags,
horse stealers, or whatever they call them. Like, it is crazy. So props to Tom White and his crew for actually getting anywhere. I honestly, if this was ever my job, I think I'd be terrible at this because... One, you got to read a lot. Like, they're just reading all these testimonies, like, over and over again, like, first eyewitnesses, talking to people, corroborating evidence. It just sounds daunting. I honestly don't know how, like, detectives and stuff do it nowadays. I couldn't even imagine in, like, the early 1900s/1800s. It's wild. What else do you have for stock up?
Stock up. Cheersing.
Cheersing with a glass?
Clinking glasses, yeah. I mean, everyone agrees prohibitions was stupid, right? And people like to drink... They'll find a way to drink. But I didn't realize this would be like the perfect excuse back then just to poison everyone. Because the reason that people were able to get away with so many poisoning is because people didn't have a regulated bar they could go to. if you go to fucking Sally's down the street and, you know, you're getting poisoned there every single night, I think you're going to stop going there. Or you open a Bud Light and you're like, oh, this Bud Light tastes fucking terrible. And then you die the next day. It's like, maybe we should stop drinking Bud Light. But
what's the rating of that restaurant if people keep dying?
Exactly. We'll get some Yelps going, you know? It's like getting people on that.
Nachos were an 8 out of 10, but my buddy died after taking a shot of whiskey, so I'm taking it down to a 7.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, he was a bank robber, scallywag, and pimp, so, I mean, you know, whatever. But, I mean, the Osage people are just dropping left and right from being poisoned, and most of the time they said it was basically because of moonshine. Like, people were like, yeah, come over and drink some moonshine. And it's like, well, it's unregulated. It is nothing. There's no way anyone could be like, this moonshine was terrible, because you never know. Oh, and the reason why it's cheersing a stock up, I forgot my stock up, is that back in the day, the reason that you cheers is so you spilled some of your drink into the other person's drink.
Uh-huh.
Once one person dies, every time there's moonshine, I'm like, you drink first.
Oh, straight like Princess Bride situation.
Exactly. I'd get a little bit more cautious on this, or at least spilling some of my drink into theirs so they get the same effect.
Yeah, it's like, if I'm going to die, you might as well die too. Yeah, no, I get it.
This is the same thing that's happening with fentanyl. Just make cocaine and all the drugs legal, and we won't have to deal with this, right?
Well, you took it to a different place, but yeah.
I mean, I understand that they're systematically trying to attack Osage people and kill them, so it's a little different than fentanyl, but at the same time...
No, I get it. Yeah, it'd be Portugal or whatever, where they legalized all drugs. I don't know too much about making bathtub gin or moonshine outside of watching Moonshiners on Discovery Channel, but it seems like, in general, you kind of boil some fruit or vegetables and you distill it down into alcohol. How does people get poisoned from that? I guess I don't know where the poisoning comes in. But I'm saying, in general, they were saying, oh, it was bad booze or whatever the case is.
It's usually when it's too strong, right? It's because you can go blind if you have moonshine that's too strong.
Good God. At least you died doing what you love. Yeah, so that whole thing was wild. Just the fact that it was just accepted across the board. Like, oh, no, they died because of consumption. It's like, what? Like, imagine. It's just like, that's a thing these days?
Wait, is consumption over drinking?
Yeah.
What's the one that's diarrhea?
Dysentery.
Oh, okay. Carry on.
Consumption from dysentery, you could definitely die from.
Oh, okay.
If you were drinking someone else's diarrhea.
Isn't that how what's-her-name died? Elvis?
No, he just died of a heart attack on a toilet, I think.
Okay. We are coming with the facts today, boys.
Also not 100% sure. Could be making that up. Elvis fans out there, let me know. My next talk up is forensics in general. I was kind of dancing around this in my last talk up, so I didn't want to burn a 2-for-1 here, but it's not that long ago. Like 1925, 1930.
100 years ago. That's pretty long.
It is, but it isn't. Like, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that long at all. They're just figuring out the idea of mugshot. Granted, like, photography is somewhat new, which is crazy, but like mugshots and fingerprints, just the general things that you would kind of do for like criminologists. I mean, they're measuring people's ears and their like left foot. Why the left foot and not the right foot? I don't know. Maybe it's more standardized. But if you had a dangerous person in your possession and you were going to let them loose, or you were feared of their escape, how are we going to send their information out to everyone else? It seems pretty standard, but that's also just hindsight. At the time, it didn't. Like, the idea of take a picture of these people so that we know and you can just look at them, as opposed to this wanted poster straight out of all the Old West stuff that we loved. It's crazy to me that people were actually able to solve any cases without a doubt, commit people to jail, considering that everything seems to be hard to prove.
Yeah. Well, I think in the past they would just be like, all right, I think it's this guy. And he's like, what'd you just say about me? We're dueling. And it's like, all right, there it is. That's it. And if he kills him, you're like, that was the guy. It was him. He should be guilty.
I think the idea of duel shootout is overdone, and I don't think it actually happened that often.
Didn't one of our presidents, someone insulted him and he's like, all right, we're dueling. He was the president of the United States and he killed a dude.
I don't know if granted, but that was a big thing with the Hamilton, the musical. Alexander Hamilton.
Jackson, his name, that's who it was. Andrew Jackson.
Well, Andrew Jackson, Old Hickory, as he is known to some, is a terrible person for sure. Talk about things he did to American Indians. My God. But
I don't know any of the history on him. I always been like, Andrew Jackson's a great president.
Well, supposedly he hated the U.S. Treasury, and because of that, he was posthumously they put his face on the $20 bill as like a big fuck you, which is amazing.
Wait, how is that a fuck you? Nobody's going to remember that.
Well, it's for him. The idea of having the treasury, having this monetary system, he hated it. And they were like, all right, now we're going to put your face on it and you can't do anything about it. But yeah, he also, like, someone came up to him and like tried to shoot him, to assassinate him, and like the gun jammed and he just like beat him over the head with a stick that he used to carry. A badass, but a terrible person. Yeah, so forensics stuck up. The thing I love about this podcast that we've never done before, because this is nonfiction, we're just making up facts. And
no, these are all true. I don't know what you're talking about.
People may or may not believe them, but I hope they're doing their I hope they're doing their own research. Quick side piece before you get into your next one. I did go to the library today because I was looking for our next book. And the librarian, they didn't have it, long story short, but she said they may or may not have it at this other library, and just instinctively I said maint. I was like, maint. and she just stopped. And, you know, it's a quiet library. There's literally no one in there. And I'm just correcting this woman who is smarter than I am for sure. And it just shot out of my mouth. I was just like, maint. Let's get into Stock Down. What do you got?
Well, keeping kind of in line with what you were just saying, which I didn't realize this wasn't the Wild Wild West, but Wild Wild West, Stock Down.
A movie?
No, not Jim West Desperado, Rough Rudder. No, you ain't got nada. Not that one, obviously. I'm talking about just the general Wild Wild West. So some of the Wild Wild West in this book was portrayed was what I thought it was. Everyone's a bank robber somehow. They're just murdering people in the streets. But for the 1920s, I didn't think we had photographs and radios and listening devices until like the 50s. Honestly, I don't know. That's dumb by me, but it just didn't make sense to me. But they also have like this well-organized investigations for what I thought it would be. I mean, they have note keeping. They have all these quotes of people saying things. They have like where they were, what they saw. There's a lot of well-detailed information that's going on here. And we read the book The Body. That takes place, what, in the 1950s, 1960s, maybe, in a suburb. They find a dead body, and they're like, yep, this is pretty cool, huh? When they found the dead body in like the water, I was just like, oh, they must see that every single day, so it's probably not a big deal. But then they made a whole big case out of it. So I was like, wait, is this not the Wild Wild West? Like, what? I thought they're just dead bodies on the street everywhere.
Yeah.
Am I wrong? No?
You are
wrong. And then the author kind of proved my point by being like, every single person just is shooting people whenever they want. Like, I remember there was a part in the book where so the guy was trying to steal some guy's jewelry. So instead of like confronting them and like arresting him, they're like, so he waited out in the jewelry store and just shot him in the face when he came through the door. I was like, wait, what? I'm like, that's how they just decided things? So did they just shovel him to the side of the road once he's done with him? Like, what happens there?
That last point is an interesting point. One, it's not the Wild West. I mean, at least, you know, the Wild West the way we think about it, like Deadwood, the show and stuff like that, is more like mid 1800s.
Anything with a rush in it, I feel like is the wild, whatever. Gold rush, the oil rush, anything can happen.
Yeah, it's more about these kind of like towns that popped up in the middle of nowhere, are usually around situations like you're talking about, oil or gold or something else. And then, you know, a town was formed and shit went down and there was just like a local lawman. But I think the story about the guy shooting the other guy over the jewelry is going to be in the movie, because I saw a quick cut from the trailer that seemed like it was going to be in there, which is in itself a fascinating story, because talk about a conspiracy. This guy was a witness. The guy that ends up dying was a witness or was like part of the murders or whatnot. So Hale tells him like, oh, you can go rob this jewelry store. The guy's not going to be there. Do it at midnight or whatever the case is. And then goes to the jewelry store guy and says, hey, this guy's going to rob you at midnight. Be ready. And so the jewelry store guy's just waiting there with his shotgun. So when the robber comes in, he kills him, and Hale gets off scot-free for this. It was a perfect setup. Really conniving and brilliant, honestly. But yes, I guess that is okay. And honestly, it probably should be, like the murdering, probably should be okay. Like if someone's going to come into your establishment and try to rob you,
stand your ground,
like, you can do it. I do remember a story about some guy who like kept getting robbed or whatnot, and basically set up a mechanism where if someone walked in his door, like a shotgun would go off and kill them. And it happened. The person came back to rob him, and the gun went off, killed the guy, and the guy who set up the contraption got charged with first-degree murder. I guess stand your ground laws, or whatever the law is, defends the idea that you can't just do that. So I guess we've advanced. I don't know.
Well, a little less stock down. I thought it'd be more rugged. Anyways.
Yeah, wiki wow.
Also, this movie that's coming out for this is 3.5 hours long.
What?
They must have just not left one detail out, right? Because the book really could have been probably cut in half, right? Because a lot of it was, one, repetitive, and two, it was like stuff you didn't really necessarily need to know. It was good for background information. There's not a 3.5 hour story out of this book that you can put on a movie screen, right?
Yeah, it'd be amazing if the first hour and a half was just an Osage woman in her rocking chair just telling you the history of the Osage people. My first stock down is Guardians. But you think that should be a good thing, right? Guardians, I mean, it's right there in the name, Guardian, the one that guards. There's lots of good guards out there. Guardians of the Galaxy, we got security guards, we got point guards, mouth guards, we got left and right guards in the NFL. There's just lots of good guards out there. But the government really ruined it for this one. I mean, this idea is just kind of mind-blowing to me and just a terrible look for the United States in general, because U.S. Congress instituted the guardianship for any Osage of half blood or more, and basically saying that, okay, you were not competent to manage your own money, someone has to do it for you, and who that someone is going to be are going to be local white lawyers and businessmen. Has the government ever heard of the fraud triangle at this point? Are they familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with it, so you tell me.
Opportunity, pressure, and rationalization is the fraud triangle. A mixture of those things is why people commit fraud. Just the racism alone is rationalization. You know, why should they have it and I shouldn't? Opportunity, the government just handed it over. And pressure can be anything from societal to internal pressure. It could be like, I can't pay my bills, so I'm going to go and do this.
Can you use that same triangle for like anything? Could you be like,
yeah,
becoming a pro athlete? You need the opportunity, you need the pressure, and you need rationalization. I can do it.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Oh, okay. Pro athletes are in fraud schemes, is what you're saying?
Yeah, positive fraud.
Yeah.
They're pos fraud. But you got the government agents, and then the guardians are going to be lawyers and businessmen. So between the three of them, is there a more corrupt bunch? Government agents, lawyers, and businessmen? They almost set this whole thing up to happen by instituting this guardian program, which was terrible. I mean, it's mind-blowing that this was a thing and continued to be a thing throughout the 20s until they finally said, oh, okay, we're going to take that back. But the murders were already done, so just terrible.
It's not a good look for the history of the country in any way. It's not nearly anywhere comparable to it, but the NCAA sports stuff was like that. They're like, they can't be paid. They can't be trusted with the money. They're not pros, all that stuff where they're just like reaping the benefits of these people, and they were like pretending like they couldn't handle the money or something like that. I don't know what the reasons they're arguing.
And if you don't think there's a ton of just underlying racism in that as well, you're crazy, because that was definitely involved in it too. Like, oh, they're going to go spend their money on whatever and whatever and whatever. It's like, who cares? Who cares if they spend their money? It's none of your friggin' business. Did you have other stock downs?
I had a couple job scorecards stock down.
Don't know what that is.
When you go to get your annual review or whatever at your job, well, I always thought they're pretty dumb.
They are dumb.
They're like, what'd you feel about your performance? And write it down in this form. It's basically just managers being like, I don't know what you did, so why don't you just tell me what you did, and then I'll tell you if you actually did that or if you did a good job. Not J. Edgar Hoover here. He was grading people out of 100, and he had all these scorecards and things like that. He basically had a combine. The best of them all was like 0 out of 10 for your looks, your appearance. I was like, I can't even imagine what that would be like today if someone ever tried to do that.
We need J. Edgar working for Madden. On the sideline, doing speed, agility, all that stuff.
That last one was treating prisoners equally, stock down. You already mentioned it. Tom White gets held at gunpoint by his own prisoners, held hostage, shot, left in a ditch to die. They get back to the prison, and he's like, you're good. Don't worry about it.
No sweat.
That's not honorable. What's the incentive not to? There's no repercussions for escaping and putting a bullet in the head of the prison. Then why isn't everyone doing it? Like, why not?
Well, I think they probably got more on their sentence or whatever. Justice was served, but he didn't want any prison justice.
I'm not saying you have to be Shawshank Redemption. I'm just saying you're not getting as many rations at mealtime. If something's gonna happen there. If you're breaking out of prison and you're putting a bullet in me.
Yeah, I'd want to see Oz brought back, the HBO series, but it's Leavenworth, Kansas, in the mid 1900s. All these period pieces here. Let's have a prison period piece going on.
Yeah.
My last one, though, is just the justice system in general.
Pretty low stock.
William Hale did some terrible things. I mean, he was the main person in the conspiracy for this story, and the amount of murders and deaths that probably all trickle to him to one degree or another are tens, if not 20s or 30s or 40s. And he gets paroled in 1947. It's like 20 years in jail after getting a life sentence. He's like 20 years in jail and then gets out. What?
Yeah, it's pretty dumb.
Well, you can argue about capital punishment or whatever it is, like killing people, electric chair hanging them, whatever the case is. I don't want to talk about that, but he's got to at least spend his life in jail.
Yeah. I actually didn't mind what they did back in the day, though. It's either you get killed, right? Capital punishment. So you're either just getting hanged or you're going for quote unquote life in prison, which is like 20 years. I actually think that's probably a better way to do it, honestly, because what's the point of putting someone in prison for the rest of their life? Just so you don't kill them, I guess? They're going to die in there. You're putting him to death. He's not going to have a life anymore. I'd rather either have them killed immediately. Is this dark? Kill them immediately or give them 20 years. They can rethink what they did and they come out as a 70-year-old or 60-year-old and they can live another life. They do it again, they get killed. I mean, easy peasy.
Well, that's the point, is they don't let them out so they can't do it again. That's the idea.
I think you're a different person 20 years later, whereas if you kill someone at 18, you should either be put to death or you put them out later. They've hopefully learned. But otherwise, if you don't think they'll ever learn, then why not just kill them then?
Well, Hale got out of prison and wanted to move back to like Osage County and take up his role as like the king of Osage County. And people are like, what are you delirious? You murdered my cousin, my wife, my friends. Like, who is this person? So he's definitely a sociopath. You gotta respect the grudge
he held, by the way. He got out 20 years later and was like, God damn it, Ernest. He kept his mouth shut. Yeah. I would have been free. It's like, bro, you want to keep that quiet a little bit.
I'm not sure if we really have a character here or a person from history.
Quick shout out to Blackie Thompson. That's the guy they release out to help with the investigation. He's a bank robber. He immediately robs a bank instantly and then kills someone. And then they're like, shit, that wasn't supposed to happen. And then they're like, all right, we're going to have to rely on this guy's testimony, though. He's just playing both sides. I know it's a real person, but what a character in real life.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this happens in the justice system now, but the amount of times people are changing their story or going back on stuff, or even the court scene when William Hale's lawyer is like, I want to talk to Ernest for a second privately. Okay. They just allow that, and he talks to him, and Ernest comes back. I was like, no, I'm actually not going to be a witness here. It's like, wait, what? That's kangaroo court. So weird stuff going on.
Yeah, very weird.
I don't know anything about it. Let's get into love-hate quickly. What did you love?
I mean, it was well-researched. Like I said, I didn't think there'd ever be this much information from stuff back then. It was kind of crazy how many quotes, how many things were actually captured.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of just all lost to history. It was kind of passed down, and the victors write the history pages, and so we just kind of heard what stories have been passed down, but they have everything recorded.
Yeah, the fact that there was so much written down, and at the end of the book, when the reporter decides to go back and is able to find all of this information and actually glean even more information from the case, more than Tom White was able to, and the surrounding cases, it's mind-boggling.
For sure.
That Dewey Decimal System that Hoover was all about is definitely helping out in cases like this because, it was extremely well-researched. There's tons of information. I loved the actual story of what was going on with Molly Burkhart and Anna Brown and Rita and Bill Smith, William Hale, Ernest Burkhart. That whole thing was fascinating to me. And I think that's what's going to be the feature of the movie. Granted, you said now it's 3.5 hours long, so who the hell knows? Because that is a long time.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, I feel like it would make a great movie since the story is pretty insane and the fact that it's real. The other things I liked, one of the Osage chiefs showed up to negotiation and just uncloaked. Yeah. That was a great negotiation tactic.
And people can do the research on their own, but if you look up, just penis sizes in general by different groups in society,
right.
There's a certain group of people that have always been known, and it's scientifically proven to have the largest penises, and you can figure that out on your own. But
that's the Instagram clip there.
Do not,
ladies and gentlemen.
Do not. This is buried deep in the pod. If you made it this far, then you get that. That's God's honest truth here.
Yeah, well, that's the one thing we've said that's true this whole podcast.
Yeah. But for some other folks, like my good buddy Vic Graham, the Lord didn't smile upon this.
I like you just chose one of your buddies to throw shade at.
Do the research. That's all I'm saying. Do the research. I've done the research. Let's get into hates. What do you got?
It's kind of basically a murder podcast in book form, which kind of said this before. I don't really love that. It's just not my cup of tea. I like fiction books. I already told you the last pod. I don't really like being in the real world because it's this exact reason. It's super depressing, and I can't believe that's our history. It makes me not really love our history very much.
It makes it tough to be an American sometimes.
Yeah, let's do a book about fiction that's like off this world. That's something different.
Yeah, like in the last book when this Leviathan wakes and like the world, this Earth is killing all these people on the asteroid belt. You're like, wow, the world sucks. Yeah. But it doesn't make me feel anything.
Exactly.
This is like, oh, the U.S. government did this. And I'm like, oh, God. My hate, I'm not a big fan of part 3 of the book. And I'm probably being a dick, but it was pretty boring. You know, it's mostly just a really long epilogue. And I know that it's super important. I do understand that because it was all to show how this William Hale story, and fuck William Hale, but, you know, it is a lot of his story. It barely scratches the surface of the depth of this conspiracy and that potentially, you know, hundreds of Osage were killed by mostly white people trying to get their hands on this oil money. And it's crazy when, you know, that truth is unearthed in part 3, but it's just a ton of stuff to get there. And I think that the journalist who did all that work, you know, they wanted to show all that work being done and appreciate it, which I do, but it was just a lot to listen to after really the story that we were invested in was already over.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's just a tough way to listen because it's just it's like regurgitating a lot of stuff. And for this type of thing, if it was a documentary, I'd be able to consume it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Here's this person. This is a real person. This is their grandmother that got killed. Yeah, you get it now. Whereas like when I'm reading it and it's just a list of names, it doesn't really hit home the same way as this is a real person. Look at them.
Yeah, and in general, just so many names. Like, so many names. It's like cousin to this person, sister to that person. It was like so hard. It was very hard to follow exactly who was who, especially because the bad guys and the good guys, and then there's guys that are flipping both sides. It was just a lot of names.
That's why I think the movie is going to be much better. I wish that it was written, again, this is like, I just don't like nonfiction. This is me saying that. But I wish it was written like that Gettysburg one we've read, where he takes the quotes, right, but then he puts it into the person and makes their personality, right? So you're like, we were inside the head of Ernest. I think that would be a really interesting character study of like what he's going through, and then we're in the head of Molly, right? Or we're in the head of J. Edgar, we're in the head of Tom White. That would be kind of really interesting to see each of their perspectives with their quotes in there. Because then you could be like, oh, this is a true story, but I took liberties, guess what they were thinking.
Yeah, this is more of just like a strict nonfiction. Like, it's not historical. It is just like a straight, very research-based, straight nonfiction, which we appreciate, but a little dense at times. Okay, so Scorsese's taking on the job of bringing this to the big screen. It's got a $200 million budget. Leo's in it, and naturally, as he's playing Ernest Burkhart. He was supposed to play Tom White. They supposedly wrote Tom White for him, but he pushed Marty to instead let him play, and I can say Marty because we're on first name basis, to instead let him play Ernest Burkhart. And so they brought in Jesse Plemons, who's to play Tom White, who, big fan of Jesse Plemons over here. I think he's
Ernest
phenomenal.
Is like the real character in this. In terms of character acting, you'd want, because Tom White's really, there's not a lot you can do with him. He's like just a good guy.
Yeah, and when Rita and Bill Smith, we didn't even talk about their house blowing up, which is wild. When their house blew up, there were supposed to be more people in that house, including Ernest's son.
Right, yeah.
So, like, at one point, he was going to be cool with his uncle blowing up his son so that he could then have these head rights, which is wild to me. Like, the fact that he was willing to do that, and his loyalty to his uncle, which then he recanted on the stand.
It's interesting that his overwhelming guilt made him confess, which is like a really interesting character, where William Hale is clearly a psychopath, where he didn't care at all. He had no remorse in any way for anything.
Played by Robert De Niro. So yeah, we don't really need to cast it, because I'm sure it was cast great, although Jesse Plemons, I don't think he's like 6'5", Tom White really was, but he can give himself a stranger. Keith, Would you recommend Killers of the Flower Moon?
The book itself I wasn't a fan of. I wouldn't recommend it, but I do think the story is incredible. I think I would recommend anyone to check out the wiki page or go see the movie. I'm excited to see it. It is 3.5 hours long, so we'll see about Scorsese's. He needs to get a better editor, I think, but we'll see how it is.
I would suggest that if anyone is interested in nonfiction involving the American West / American Indians, Empire of the Summer Moon, which is like the Quanah Parker story, who is chief of the Comanches, I want to say. That nonfiction story is awesome, in my opinion. Because it is this similar thing where they're assimilating into white culture, but they don't necessarily want to. And the Comanches themselves are these like super badass horse riders, like Mongolian style badass horse riders that can do anything with a horse. You know what I mean? Like shoot arrows from underneath the horse so that they're not getting shot by rifles. It's like crazy stuff. That was a really good one. Yeah, I'm with Keith here. It's not, I wouldn't recommend it unless if you like nonfiction stuff, like real nonfiction stuff. This is probably up your alley and go on and enjoy it. For me, I was just kind of waiting for it to be over when it was part 3. I did enjoy part 1, which was kind of like the backstory stuff, but it was also like a lot of that. And then kind of like I said with part 2, it was jumping all over the place. There's just so much going on. It was hard to follow. I'm glad that someone took the time to make this. It's a story that definitely should be told. It's a tough story from America's history, and the Osage people deserve to have this story be told, but just not a great read. What do we got coming up next?
All right, next, a D-Man special for Halloween. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by ALVIN Schwartz.
This just came to me. We were kind of talking about what our next book was, and we usually have some ideas in the hopper, and we were kind of in a lull, and this just came to me because it's almost Halloween. I thought it'd be fun. Everyone's read this when they were in elementary school. Like, I'm super excited to reread these short stories, and we'll have a fun Halloween pod for everyone. So I'm excited for that. But Keith, always good talking to you. This was Killers of the Flower Moon. Go out and check out the movie if you've read it and you listen to us. We appreciate it, and we'll catch you for Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Bye now.